Thank you for joining us for our story today. We have an ongoing series of stories dealing with bullying. I like to read these stories at the beginning of a school year as a reminder to kids about how to treat one another, about what to do when you have a problem with someone else, and some strategies on how to deal with them. So hopefully these stories cause you to sit down and chat with your kids, give some thought, perhaps if you are a child, and how you treat others in the classroom and what kind of friend you are to others. And I hope you enjoy The Juice Box Bully. This is a story that empowers kids to stand up for others. It's written by Bob Sorensen and Maria Dismondi. The Juice Box Bully. As Pete stood in front of his new class, Mr. Peltzer announced, "Let's welcome Pete to our team. Pete, you will be sitting behind Ralph." Settling into his seat, Pete pulled his hat down over his head so that only his eyes could be seen. Turning around, Ralph warned him, "They don't allow hats in class at this school." "You're not my mother," snarled Pete. And then it says here, "The Promise at Mandel Elementary." So probably at least someone listening to the story has been the new child in the classroom, and you can probably relate to how Pete is feeling. He's a stranger in his classroom. He doesn't know anybody yet, and the first experience he has is someone trying to give him some advice about a rule that maybe he didn't know about. After giving an assignment, Mr. Peltzer walked around the class and quietly asked Pete to remove his hat. Once he walked away, Pete poked Ralph. "Thanks a lot," he growled. So obviously he thinks that the classmate told on him and told the teacher, but probably the teacher just was reminding him of the same rule that Ralph was reminding him about. Later that day at recess, Pete didn't ask to join the soccer game. Instead, he just watched. "Hi, Pete," Ralph said. "Do you want to get into the game?" "Not with those nerds," replied Pete. "I don't like those kids." "What do you want to do?" asked Ralph. So is he trying to be a friend to him? He's trying to invite him to participate and play with the friends and get to know people. And he's even asking him, if it's not soccer, what would you like to do? Pete smiled spitefully. "Let's steal the ball. We're bigger than them. We can have our own game." "I don't think so," answered Ralph. "That's not how we do things around here." "Well, then I'll do it myself," taunted Pete, "if you're so afraid." Pete ran over to the field and yelled, "Pass it to me!" And when David passed the soccer ball, Pete grabbed it and ran off the field. "What's going on?" shouted David. Pete didn't answer. He ran faster and faster and then turned and waved the ball in the air. At first, the kids just stood there. Then they huddled together, and before walking over to Pete, Ruby and Lucy led the way. "I know you're new around here, but what are you doing?" asked Ruby. "I'm playing with the soccer ball," Pete snapped. "Think you're going to take it away from me?" Ruby didn't argue, nor did she threaten Pete. Instead, she softly but firmly explained, "It's your first day here, so there's no way you could possibly know this, but in Mr. Peltzer's class, we all made a promise. We promised to take care of ourselves, each other, and our classroom, and to solve problems peacefully. We promised that in this class, no one would stand by and accept bad behavior. And when someone acts hurtfully, we all speak up. We want you to be a member of the class and to make the same promise." Dumb rule. Dumb promises. Throwing the ball to the ground, Pete walked away. I don't know. I think I'd like to be in Mr. Peltzer's class. I like a class where everyone promises to be good to each other and solve problems peacefully and stand up for each other. The next day, Pete ate alone. When he finished lunch, the kids raced out of the lunchroom while Pete trailed behind. Ruby ran up to Pete and asked, "Do you want to play soccer today?" "I don't play with nerds." "Okie dokie," replied Ruby. And then in the classroom here you can see, how do you use the promise at home? So how do you solve problems peacefully? How do you show kindness to others when you're at home? So obviously Mr. Peltzer wants his students to keep the promise even at home because it makes for a better place to be. "Hey, Ruby," Pete called after her. Ruby stopped and turned. "Nice shirt," Pete complimented, and then he squirted his juice box right at her. "You are so mean," she shrieked at him. "I'll tell everyone how mean you are. You won't have any friends here." And there you can see all the people who took the pledge. By now, Ralph, David, and some others had come up to them. "Ruby, I'm not going to let you do that," Ralph said clearly. "Remember the promise." "I don't want to remember the promise. Look what he did." "We'll ignore him forever until he leaves this school and goes back to his old school," Ruby demanded. Now, we all know that's probably Ruby just being upset. She's going to remember the promise she made. I feel certain about it. But right now, she's pretty upset, and she might be saying some things she might be regretting. Ralph walked between Ruby and Pete. "We're not going to do this, Ruby. I know you're angry. You can tell Mr. Peltzer if you want, but we're not going to let you treat Pete like this. And we won't put up with this bad behavior either." Ruby stomped away, leaving Pete and Ralph behind. "No one's ever done that before," Pete said. "Why did you stand up for me?" "I've been in your shoes. I learned being a bully doesn't work." "And I'm not a bystander," Ralph said. "I don't stand by and let mean things happen. Besides, Ruby is my friend, and you should not have ruined her shirt." "Won't the other kids be mad at you for sticking up for me?" Pete asked. "No way. They all made the same promise. We talked about it for a long time with Mr. Peltzer, and every kid here tries to keep that promise." "At my old school, I got picked on all the time," said Pete. "Everybody just let it happen, so I started to tease kids before they could be mean to me." Ralph replied, "We decided that when somebody tries to be a bully, no one is going to stand by and let it happen. We speak up or we ask for help from an adult, but we will not be bystanders to bad behavior." The bell rang and it was time to go back to class. "They hate me. They'll never let me play with them," Pete said. Before Ralph could answer, David, Lucy, and Ruby came toward them. "I'm sorry about what I said," Ruby apologized. "I can't believe I forgot the reason why we made that promise. If we can remember to stand up for each other, school is a lot more fun." "Wow, the kids here are way different than at my other school," said Pete. "Maybe I'll give this promise thing a try." "Great! Let's go talk to Mr. Peltzer," said Ruby. "Hey, Ruby, I'm sorry about your shirt," Pete added. Ruby smiled. "No worries. I kind of like my new look." Everyone laughed as Pete and Ruby led the way into class. So the story ends with the promise that is made in that classroom. I'm going to read you that promise because perhaps you might want to make that promise at home. You might want to share this promise with your new teacher when school starts up again, and maybe your class would like to make this promise also. The promise is, "I will speak up instead of acting as a bystander. I choose to participate in activities that do not involve teasing. I forgive others if they make poor choices. I model good behavior. I accept others for their differences. I include others in group situations. I will talk to an adult when there is a problem I cannot manage on my own. I am powerful in making a difference in my school. And by making the promise to stand up against bad behavior, we can put an end to bullying. I think that's a great place to stop and a great reminder about how to treat one another and the good that comes from good behavior. Have a great day, everyone. Keep smiling. Keep reading great books. Keep breathing. Have a great day.